everyone, welcome back to another episode of Stripped by Sia, your podcast for strippers, sex workers, and all the fancy naked people in between. I am your host, Steph Sia, aka Kimchi on stage. You can catch me dancing on these strip club stages here in Vancouver, Canada at some point. I don't know when I'll be dancing next at this point, but it's probably going to be actually, no, I lied. It's going to be next week at Shaker's Show Lounge. Feel free to pop in. Maybe you want to get a dance for me, come chat about the podcast, which people have done, which is really, really cool, or just get a fun little dance for me. I was a former sugar baby many moons ago. I've spoken about that on other episodes. Feel free to peep that if you're interested in that. But I am most interested in our guest today, who I will be introducing in just a couple minutes here. I just want to do a quick shout out to our Patreon subscribers here. We just have some new people that joined on. We do have some new people that are on the top tier as well. Big shout outs go out to Snoo Stew, all the way from Germany. We have Jay Sunstern, all the way from Canada, where I am located, and Justin Erickson, based in the USA, and Rup Sarkar, who's also here in Canada. Thank you all for being on the top tier, for donating and subscribing every single month for the low price of $4, going up to $10, but you're more than welcome to come peep that on the Patreon page. There's different tiers there that are accessible, and your support helps support the show, helps keep me going. One day I will buy a new mic and a new system to record as well. But as you all might know, this is entirely a accessible resource. Anyone can listen to it. It's free, and it's a really great educational piece. I want to say, if you're never not in the sex industry, if you're just like in the vanilla life, which is totally cool. It's a really, really great thing you can learn from. And again, just one step to getting us closer to destigmatizing the industry, and my own little way of doing that. So thank you so much. Shout out to all those on Patreon. Feel free to check that out. Patreon.com/strippedbysia. So going back to this week's guest, I am super, super, super excited to bring Dr. Lori Beth Bisbey onto the show today. And I'm going to be listing out all of the things she does because she is amazing. And I just can't wait to try to pack it all in today's episode. But if you're not familiar, Dr. Lori Beth is a sex and intimacy coach, a registered psychologist, accredited advanced GSRD, which is gender, sex, relationship diverse therapist, and host of the podcast, The A to Z of Sex. And if you are familiar with the name, you might have heard her or maybe seen her on television as well as a relationship expert on Open House, The Great Sex Experiment. Dr. Lee Beth, you do all of the things, and I just want to say hello and bring you onto the show. I'm just like listing out everything, and there are more things. But I'm like, I think this is relevant.
That's enough.
Yeah, like we can talk. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me.
It's
a pleasure to be here.
We're happy to have you here, and I'm just really excited to pick your brain on all of the things in terms of like sex and intimacy coaching, talking a little bit about trauma as well. A lot of us have experienced trauma. Not a stereotype, no. Like a lot of us have had some trauma, or we're holding on to a lot of that. So I really want to kind of touch base on that, and also just hear about your own story as well, because I read a little bit online, but I would love to hear your own story in your own words as well. But before we move on to things, I would love to kind of hear yourself and talk about like who you think you are, how you define yourself in your own words and terms.
So I define myself as a queer, polyamorous leatherwoman. I live in a 24/7 authority transfer-based relationship. Otherwise, for people in previous terms, was known as power exchange. But we don't use that term anymore.
Oh.
The reason we don't use that term is that you actually don't hand your power over ever. And it's important that people understand that your power is your power. And so I use the example of if you own a really nice car and your friend asks, can I drive your car? You give them the keys to the car, but you don't give them the car.
Right. Right.
And so when you are handing over, you're handing over authority, but you always have power. And that means that the relationship is fully consensual and you can leave at any time. You can stop at any time. And I think that's always an important thing for people to understand when you say that you live this way, because people panic when you say you live this way.
Right. Okay. I had no idea that that term was like no longer used. So thank you already. I'm already
Well,
learning
we
and paying
try.
attention.
We're trying educating one person at a time. I still think a lot of people, because when you just come into the idea of BDSM and the power dynamic of it, people still use power exchange so much that I think it'll be a long time before that gets dropped.
Mm-hmm.
But it's more accurate to talk about handing over authority.
Authority, right. And we can definitely get into a little bit of that later too, because we have had a lot of people that are in the kink community as well as the BDSM community and polyamory community as well come onto the show too. So I'd love to hear a bit more about that too when we get into the nitty gritty of everything. But sorry to interrupt your introduction there.
No, that's how I live personally as a therapist. I have two specialties. One of them is the treatment of trauma. I co-authored a book on that in
Mhm.
1988. My God, I'm aging myself. Um, and the other one is gender, sex, and relationship diversity. So basically,
Mhm.
that means that while I will work with anybody about sex and intimacy issues and relationship issues, most of my clientele are considered to be living in some form of alternative lifestyle. An alternative lifestyle ends up being defined as anything from LGBTQ to kink and BDSM to non-monogamy to sex work, because people consider that to be alternative. So that's most of my clientele.
Right.
And work-wise, that's where I specialize.
Gotcha. And that's really interesting because you mentioned sex work as part of that group as well. Like, and a lot of people do think it's alternative. Um, what would you say about that? Because, like, again, like for me and my show, I'm just really trying to normalize our profession just because it is just like, I mean, it's not like any other job, but like it should be treated as such. So I would love for you to kind of like hear a little bit about your own thoughts on that.
Well, so I mean, I like it actually ending up in the alternative category because it emphasizes the fact that it's a choice.
Hmm.
And so it normalizes sex work from the point of view of saying this is a choice that people make. And it is a choice that might look different from a heteronormative standard lifestyle choice. And that actually sex work has its own set of challenges when it comes to sex and relationships. And I think if a therapist doesn't recognize that there are challenges, not reasons to get out of sex work, just
Hmm.
challenges, right? Like my work has challenges to relationships. Because of what I do every day, there are specific challenges that arise in my personal relationships. And so I look at sex work in the same way because of what a sex worker does every day. There are particular challenges that arise in sex and relationships that we would look at, but not with the bias that often comes with that when somebody goes to see a coach, a counselor, or a therapist, which is they localize the problems in what you do for a living.
Right. Yeah. And like we've spoken to a couple of therapists on the show at some point too that are sex worker friendly therapists because, as you know, and you mentioned, there is bias out there too. And like not a lot of therapists are sex worker friendly, or as you mentioned, will be trying to convince you to get out
They're
of
not
industry.
only not friendly, they're not knowledgeable. So
Mhm.
they haven't patronized any kind of sex work themselves. They've not been exposed to sex work. They don't understand what a wide range that is. Um, and so even if you are not biased, to not know anything about it can be problematic.
Yeah, and I feel that that definitely is. Yeah, you hit the nail on the head for that one for sure. Just because, like, what kind of advice could you possibly give if you are so like far away from that world and you have no depth or no knowledge, no empathy to deal with that? That can be really dangerous, and not a safe environment for a sex worker seeking that kind of therapy. So, Yeah, and we'll definitely speak about stuff like that later on in the show as well. There's lots to talk about today. I'm gonna again trying to squeeze it all in this tight little hour. But Lori Beth, I would really love to hear like your upbringing, your background and stuff as well, and how it got you here. How did you get yourself here?
So, I mean, I grew up in a household where boundaries were very variable. So I grew up not feeling like I had a lot of rights to say no and to establish nice, clear physical boundaries and nice, clear emotional boundaries. And as a result of being in that environment, I had some experiences as an adolescent that were not optimal. Um, and then I went away to university. And I already knew that I was sexually different from what I was being taught about, the little teaching we got in school. People need to keep in mind I am not a young woman. So we had even less training, and there was no internet when I was growing up. Let's put it this way. Let's put it this way. The first home computers didn't come out until I was in university. So that just gives you kind of a context. And so I knew I was different. And part of the way I knew that was by saying something to one of my friends who went, "What are you talking about?"
Oh no.
And so, yeah, no, it was really awful. So that's where sort of a desire to understand started. When I was in university, I'd already identified that I liked being in the submissive role during sex. I identified that I identified that when I was 15, 14. And so a friend of mine introduced me to a man, and he turned out to be a monster. And I had, at 19, an experience that caused me to get post traumatic stress disorder. I was kept a prisoner for 5 days and multiply abused. And it was really life changing, yes, but it was a really intense experience that had a number of impacts, one of which was I got post traumatic stress disorder. The other bit, though, was that as far as my sexuality was concerned, because what I wanted was some of the things that he did to me before he became a monster. So for 2 weeks, he was a doll and then he was a monster. It screwed me up because now I wanted things that I felt led to me ending up in this situation. So I thought it was all my fault. But even afterwards, I still wanted them. So it was a real mess to untangle. What do I do with my desires when my desires seem to be screwed up and ended up getting me in trouble? So when I decided to go to school to study psychology, and the two areas that I was interested in were the treatment of trauma and sex and relationships because of my background. And so that's what I ended up looking at. And I spent the first part of my career completely embedded in the trauma world with a small practice around sex and relationships. And then I built up the sex and relationships practice.
Wow, and there you are. Here you
Yeah.
are today.
Yeah. And I mean, I treat people in the way that I was treated that helped me get rid of the PTSD. So, I got successful treatment, and I don't have and haven't had PTSD for many, many years.
Wow.
It is, I wouldn't really remember the anniversary of the trauma anymore, except that my son happens to be born right on the anniversary.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
And so it'll be 40 years this year since
Wow.
that. And my life is absolutely amazing. Couldn't be more different than I was right after that. So for people who have experienced intense trauma, it is actually possible not to just learn to manage your triggers, but actually to have that be something that's in your past and to go on and thrive and just be content and happy in your life and make really good choices.
That's amazing. And that's so like nice to hear as well, just because and I know there's a lot of listeners that have had trauma and suffer from anxiety. And that just seems to be like really comforting to know that it is possible to move on from that, like really move on. Not like what you said too, just like managing your triggers, but to have that separation. So that's amazing. And I'm really sorry to hear what happened to you, and just thank you for sharing and being vulnerable right now with that, because it's hard. It's really
Well, I
hard.
mean, it really isn't that hard for me to talk about anymore
Mhm.
because it is really in my past. When I was on Open House, I was dealing with a guy who was talking about um, a trauma that he'd experienced, and he was insisting that he was over it, and he kept getting really, really angry about it. And I said to him, "Do you want to know how you know when the trauma is finished? You no longer regret that it happened. You no longer care. It's not important anymore."
Mhm.
And I get really uptight that therapists are still telling people that the only way to do this is to manage it, that there's no way to actually put this in your past, that you just have to learn to defuse things and step lightly around them and manage them. And that's just not true. So that's one of my big soapboxes that I constantly tell people, that it is actually possible to have a life after trauma. You do have to do the right work.
Yeah.
So you need the right trauma therapy, and it is hard work. No lie, it is hard work. But if you're willing to do that, then you can move on. I wrote my memoir some years ago. I wrote an erotic memoir instead of writing a straightforward memoir. So, and just like you're trying to normalize sex work, one of the things for me was normalizing extreme kinks. And so what I did was, my erotic memoir, you have a piece of erotica, then a description of my history that I relate to that piece of erotica, and then a little bit of analysis throughout the book.
Cool. That
It
is
is.
so
It's really cool.
awesome.
It's really cool. But right after I wrote that, people were like, "Oh my god, oh my god, I'm so sorry. Are you okay?" And I was like, "I am now." I wasn't then, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's what the important thing is that I am now, but I wasn't then.
Mhm.
And lots of people have trauma that isn't of the same level of devastation as mine was. Like, I
Right.
gave the very bare bones here. In the book, it goes into it in detail. But also, lots of people have trauma that I would call like ordinary trauma, in quotes,
Mm.
which are the things that many of us experience, like catastrophic loss when somebody that we're very close to dies, losing pets,
Right. Yeah, I guess
major
it's
accidents,
ordinary. Right.
right? Ordinary, but it can have just as much of an impact.
Yeah. I mean, like, how do you measure the impact it can have in someone? Because, like, if I can share, like, my own trauma on the podcast, I was sexually assaulted at the age of 18. And I don't know, like, I maybe it's just the way that I've internalized it, or maybe, like, I'm very okay and open to talking about it, but, like, what sh- what I feel is I just don't feel like I have been that affected by it, or maybe that's just how I'm packaging it, but I can talk freely about it. I just feel like I should have been more devastated about it. What can you tell about that?
There is, because like there is no should. And that's one of the things that drives me crazy, right?
Mhm.
So you were sexually assaulted and it didn't impact you to the intensity that you thought it would because of what everybody talks about.
Yeah.
Everybody's different. Everybody's different. Everybody's resilience levels are different. Um, Everybody's got a whole different constellation of events. And you just say sexual assault. Now, some people would describe what I went through as rape and sexual assault.
Mhm.
But I bet what I went through and what you went through are categorically, there are very few people who have been through what I've been through. So I can confidently say I probably went through something that was what other people would go, that was bigger, right?
Right.
It doesn't matter. I could have been less affected and you could have been more affected. You never know. So rather than kind of figuring out what you should be feeling, look at what you are feeling. If it's not something that causes you symptoms in your life, it doesn't trigger and it doesn't cause you to try to avoid things, or doesn't cause intrusive thoughts, doesn't make you anxious, then that's fine. It's a part of life that you have integrated.
Mhm.
And there's no need to be worried about the fact that it isn't a big thing, right?
Yeah. And that's the thing too, is because, like, I don't know, I just feel like society has fed us. Like, we have to feel this way, or we have to feel something, or we have to behave in a certain way. And, like, I mean, basically I was raped by two men, and, like, for me, like, I just feel like I don't react the same way as maybe other people or my peers have acted, and it just puts me in a weird place because it like puts me in a place where like I it doesn't feel like I can empathize with them, but I can, but like it's just a tricky spot to be in, if that makes any sense at all. Like
Yeah,
it's
I mean,
weird.
it's the thing is that reactions aren't public. I mean, it's very important for us to normalize things so that people understand what you might go through. But it's equally important that we let people know that we are all different. And just because somebody's not reacting in the way that you've seen in the movies or the way that somebody's described, the therapist that you've spoken to, people who have presented online, the
Hmm.
movie of the week, whatever, has described, it doesn't mean that somebody's um, doing something wrong or that it's really there deep down and it's only going to come out later. Sometimes that's true. Sometimes people really shove stuff down and it comes out later, but other times it isn't. And we don't know all the factors that cause people to experience trauma on the emotional side when things happen that are terrible, right? We don't know what causes one person 100% to get post-traumatic stress disorder and the next person to be upset for a couple of weeks and then sort it out,
Right. There's
right?
so many
Some
factors
ideas.
involved.
Yeah, we have some ideas. Like, one of the things we know is the more trauma you've experienced, the more likely you are to have a response. But we also know that the more trauma you've experienced, the less likely you are to have a response. And so people are like, what are you saying? What that means is that for any given event, the fact that you've already experienced a lot of trauma will protect you to some degree. But it also means that particular events, and we can't predict which ones they were, if they do strike home, are likely to cause you to have a stronger response.
Right. Gosh, I mean, this whole world is completely fascinating. And I'm sure we can spend hours and hours talking about just trauma alone. But I know like a lot of people, especially people in the audience, we always love, and going back to kind of what you were mentioning earlier with the outdated term of power exchange, but you're now referring to as authority transfer. I'd love to hear more about that because there is a lot of people that do listen to the show and are also part of that community as well. Can you talk to us about power in general and like how that contributes to different types of relationships like BDSM, like our community, and like polyamory?
Sure. Okay, so all relationships have power dynamics,
Hmm.
right?
Yes.
So ordinary relationships have power dynamics. There's always um, a back and forth between who's in charge of what and and who's following, who's leading, who's following, who's following, who's leading. There's always a back and forth. And the easiest example is to give is a traditional sort of old style marriage, right? In an old fashioned marriage, the man is the provider and he goes out into the world and does the things in the world, and the woman is taking care of the home. And in lots of those households, who has the final word? It's the man of the house. He has the final word on everything, right?
Right.
He delegates things to her, but for big things, he's the final word. So if you look at that, that's just a power exchange right there,
Right.
right? It's a power dynamic.
Hmm.
He's in control overall. She has control over a certain area. It's not negotiated because people just kind of accept that from what they've grown up learning about.
Right.
Well, that's the problem. When people are in the kink and BDSM community, what they do is they actually negotiate the power dynamic. And
Right.
what's great about that is that you can decide what you are willing to surrender control over and what you're not. And so you can create something that's tailor made. Now, I will do a little diversion here into it's very popular to talk about the fact that in polyamory that things should be equal and every relationship should be equal. And
Right. I've heard that before.
yeah, it's rubbish. Equality is really difficult, right? To get
Right.
everything exactly equal is really difficult. Equality also means nobody's special. And that's not what anybody really wants when they're talking about what they want in a relationship. What they mean when they're saying it needs to be equal is I don't feel as special as that other person over there. I want to
Right.
feel as special, right?
Yeah, of course.
So rather than kind of do this thing where we're trying to make things equal, which never works anyway, look at where the balances are going to be is a much easier way to do it. And again, because you're openly negotiating it. So power is sexy, right?
Yeah,
Power is
definitely.
really sexy, which is why people bother with authority transfer, right? Because power is
Mhm.
sexy. And particularly if you are somebody who in life wields a lot of power, letting go of power is also very sexy.
Yes,
Being
yes.
able to give up control is amazingly fun when you are the one who's making all the decisions and in control in the world.
Right. And like this topic comes a lot too on the show because like there are lots of situations and even in sex work that like the work that we do, we tend to take on different roles or like do role playing in relationships or with our clients and stuff as well. I'd really be curious to hear about the power dynamic between say a provider and a client, how that works.
So that's a harder one. That's
Yeah.
complicated, right?
Very
Because even
complicated.
if they're asking you to be in the submissive role, right? Um, that's actually somewhat easier if they're asking you to be in the submissive role. But let's say they want you to be dominant,
Right.
but they're paying you.
Yes.
And that cash has power attached to it, right?
Yes.
The currency is power. The power is flowing towards you. They're giving you this because that's power in the world for you,
Mhm.
right?
Right.
So let's say you're going to be dominant with somebody, but you don't want to do any of the things that he or she wants to do, right? That they
Okay.
want to do. That's problematic because if you say, well, I'm not willing to do any of those things, but, and the things you're willing to do, they're not interested in, you lost a client.
Right. Yeah. Well, and
Whereas if you're doing that kind of, if you're doing that kind of power exchange with a partner or in a situation in which money is not changing hands, so it's not a professional relationship, it's a personal relationship, you can negotiate beforehand and then hand over during the whole session. And then, you are free to do everything you want to do within the limits that you guys agreed upon before the session.
right.
It's a little bit more different. I think sex workers feel less free to be themselves in those circumstances because there's a script that somebody might come to you with. And even though it's not your thing and it doesn't really turn you on, if you're going to satisfy the customer and therefore have a repeat customer, you have to kind of do the script.
Yeah, yeah, I definitely hear you. And I was really curious to talk to you about this because like back in my time as a sugar baby, going back to that cash is power, that was always above my head, tempting me to be like, okay, if you do this, this, and this, then you'll get more money. I'll pay you more. And I'd be tempted by that, even though that was crossing my boundaries. But then back in the day, I didn't have boundaries. So like that was that was a whole thing. But I mean, like, I'm curious to hear about like how for those who are say like we kind of have already negotiated what we wanted and that's fine. We're not going to be crossing boundaries or anything like that. Like who has the power in that say? Would it be for the provider or would it be for the client? Does
Well,
that make any
it depends on what you're doing, right? It's like
right.
if you're doing a full on authority transfer, then if you've already negotiated the boundaries and you're going to stick to the boundaries and you're the dominant person, then you might be the one who's got the control, the power there, the authority there, right?
Yeah.
But, or you might be giving it up. If you're going to be the submissive side, you might be giving it up. But, but there's always the possibility in that kind of relationship more so, I think, than in personal ones, although people do push boundaries in personal ones too. There's always that possibility that what you described, I've heard other people describe, right? Where
Yeah.
it's like, you know, the person that I was escorting, and I've heard it a lot actually from sugar babies, where like the
Mhm.
guy that I was dating, and this was definitely the role, I set my boundaries and then he would say, well, I'd like you to do this, and then I'll buy you this, or I'll give you that,
Yeah.
and so that was definitely the means of power right there, the
Yeah.
currency.
For sure. And like it's interesting that you mentioned that you hear this a lot coming from sugar babies because again, like I just feel like a lot of sugar daddies will try to take advantage of sugar babies because we don't have these boundaries established or because we can possibly be tempted with more cash as opposed to like professional escorts like we'll have a services menu and if it's not on there you're not going to entertain that and don't even think if you're a client, you're going to be starting to bring that up midway through your session because you're going to be blocked, deleted, and kicked out like right away. You know what I mean?
Well, that's because you have very clear boundaries as an escort there. And that in the sugar baby relationship, because it's a girlfriend sort of experience,
Experience.
the
Right.
problem is people don't set really clear boundaries. You can, though,
Mm-hmm.
right? You can decide that that's what you're going to do, and you educate your client about that because they're still a
Right.
client, right? You
Yes.
know, you're still a client, and they know that.
Mm-hmm.
They can pretend in their mind whatever they want to pretend, but if they're supporting you and you have one or more than one of them supporting you, and that's what you do for work, they're your client. And
Right.
so you can actually choose to say, yes, although I don't have the same kind of menu of services that somebody who is doing this on an hourly basis or a nightly basis, one night at a time, I do actually have my limits.
Right.
These are the things that are included in me being a sugar baby. These are the things, these are my limits.
Mm-hmm.
These limits are not negotiable.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like that conversation probably doesn't happen as often as it needs to. And I'm just
Absolutely.
speaking from personal experience. So but I
Well, the
mean,
expectation is that you won't have the conversation. That's why. So
yeah.
if you're educated to know that it's a good thing to do, then you will bring it up. But the expectation from the guy's side is you won't have that conversation.
Yeah. And I feel like, I mean, and I don't want to harp on men, but I feel like sometimes I'm just, I hate generalizing too because that's also problematic and it's not productive. But generally speaking, and this is more so in terms of like bad clients, but hearing men trying to push boundaries, is this something common that you're hearing a lot as a therapist or like even as like a sex coach? Men trying to push the boundaries more than the women, or women trying to push like in this like heteronormative scale?
I, I
Like,
think I think that things can feel different depending on the gender, right?
mhm.
And that people, male presenting folk, push different kinds of boundaries than female presenting folk do. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
because even as a therapist, people push boundaries.
right.
I mean, the biggest boundary for me is that this is an obvious one. So I've got a lot of free content out there. I've got my podcast. I've been on the television show, and I've done a lot of podcasts, and I write articles and all this stuff. And on my website, I've got a media page where this will be, when this comes out, this will be one of the links on the media page. And I usually have about 24 to 30 links on the page at a time. But I do a lot of stuff. So you can find a ton of free content done by me. And there's a blog on there, loads and loads and loads of free content. And yet people will write me and say, I have a question, or I just want one thing. So I've taken to, I have a nice little automated response now that says, hi, sorry about this, but I can't do this anymore because I just get so many requests.
Yep.
And I save my individual advice and work for my paying clients.
Of course.
You can go do my free stuff. But here are some ways of getting my help at lower cost, right?
Yeah.
So I've got to get an email response to a question, right? Is the cheapest thing you can do with me. Then
Yep.
there's get a video response to your personal question. and then a half hour at a reduced cost to discuss if we're going to work further or to
Right.
deal with one issue. So that's kind of the gradation. Then you're getting into my regular rates, whatever.
Right.
And yet, no matter how many times I send this out, invariably, I will be asked 2 or 3 more times when it's a man. But I only have one question. Yes, and there's a link for you to go
Yeah.
and do the one question. But why can't I have that one question for free?
Yes.
Because I don't work for free,
Yes.
right?
Yeah,
And it's just that simple.
it is.
This is my livelihood, the same as you don't work for free.
Yes, I was just going to
As
bring
a
that up.
sex worker, you have a time limit, and your time limit is your time limit because this is your livelihood. And you are selling your time in a sense. I mean, yes, other things, but you really are selling your time. And so you can't go over your time limit and not be paid because it cuts into your livelihood.
Exactly. Oh, that was so eloquently put. Thank you so much for that because we get that a lot. Again, like with our websites, with the bombarding of DMs and Twitter and tweets, and really trying to take our time away from us. And it's just like, okay, yes, but now like here's my OnlyFans link. You can go ahead and subscribe there. I will answer your questions there in my on my paid platform.
Right. So there are ways of you to get our services,
Yes.
and there's a scale from the quite cheap, right,
Hmm.
to the very expensive because you're having my undivided attention in person. So there's a whole scale for you to get that, and yet people will still push that, or an extra 5 minutes, an extra 10 minutes, an extra 15. It's like
No,
no, it just doesn't work that way. But it's fascinating to me that even when you set the boundary, that there's that pushback. And
constantly.
then I think it's funny that I have yet to have anybody actually go ahead and pay for the answer to a question. So they'll wait until I block them because I've had to block people because they one person has changed their name 4 times.
Jeez.
Every time I block, I get it from another,
Oh my god.
um, and hit me up on every social media platform, and got my phone number and hit me up on WhatsApp as well.
Jeez.
Like, and it's like, yeah, really. So I'm blocking everywhere. But really, with the amount of time and energy you invested, the relatively small amount of money I was asking for, you could have just gotten what you wanted,
Yeah.
right?
Could have.
By simply doing that. But for some reason, setting the boundary is difficult because people don't take well to it.
No, they don't. Or they don't take it seriously, or they don't see it as a boundary, or they don't value your time, which sometimes it just boils down to that, and then will not pay for it. And like again, we've had like this conversation so many times on the podcast, like people not paying for porn, people not paying for our time, and like wanting to chat with them and do all this stuff. Like we just don't have time. We just don't have
Well,
time.
I know, with sex work, it's I mean, significantly harder than the position that I'm in because ultimately, you know, I don't have to interact one on one to encourage clients in the way that you do when you're on paid platforms, right?
Yeah, it's
Right. So somebody who's paying you very little, you still have to spend quite a bit of time on because you have to encourage the ongoing income, and
yeah,
I'm not doing that. So I mean, you're already having to put out comparatively quite a bit of time per what you end up receiving.
totally. And
And there's a limit to the amount of hours there are in a day. So the boundaries are really important. But also, I don't think, I think this is universal. As of yet, people aren't brought up to learn to have boundaries and respect boundaries yet. I mean, I think that's happening now more than it used to.
yeah, for those who don't know, and I know you probably don't know this yet because we just met today, but I also work with like a sexual health educator too, and I know that they're trying to teach consent and boundaries now in like elementary school, but we never had those conversations when I was growing up, when I was a kid or a teen or anything. Like those conversations never happened. So I feel like there are some strides to try to normalize that and just have that to be like we need to teach this is important, so
We were talking about power before, with and you asked about power in the exchange, in a sex work exchange. And
Mm-hmm.
one of the ways that people try to assert their power is by pushing your boundaries.
Mm-hmm. And it happens too often. Too often. But I mean, going along with boundaries, I mean, that's also really important to have whenever you're being intimate with someone. And I know you also offer sex coaching and intimacy coaching. Can you quickly tell the audience what that is? Because I'm sure there's a lot of assumptions of what that might entail.
So, therapy, we tend to look at the past. Yeah. I mean,
Yes.
we do look at things going on in the present, but we tend to start in the present. We spend a lot of time in your childhood and all of that. Right? We're working on a lot of the emotional stuff. I mean, this is the big generalization, guys, but that's the work of therapy looks in the past first and then comes to the present. Coaching starts in the present. You do get a little bit of past for context, but you start in the present and you're working forward. So the idea is you're working on the issues in the here and now and you're working forward. And so a lot of sex coaching and intimacy coaching for me, once I've got a pattern history from you, is helping people create new patterns and learn new skills. So
Mm-hmm.
some of those skills are communication skills because people's communication skills are notoriously bad. Some of those skills are sex skills or BDSM skills or things like that. I will give you stuff that you can do with a partner to learn. I
Mm-hmm.
do not do the hands-on work.
Right.
There are people who do.
Right.
I don't. And I don't because it would be confusing because I also do therapy with people and there you couldn't, right? That would be
Mm-hmm.
frowned upon in a big way. And so because I have both roles, even if I'm sticking to one role with somebody and I'm not doing therapy, it's just easier for me not to be involved in that part of it.
Gotcha.
So the most people have ever seen me do is a demonstration with a partner of mine.
Mm-hmm.
We demonstrate for something for somebody so they can see how you might do it.
Gotcha. That
Um,
makes sense.
but most of the coaching is around skills, and helping people to communicate more and helping people get rid of shame because
Right.
shame is a big thing that comes in.
Yes.
Own their desires, find their desires. So sometimes I'll send people to sex workers.
Mhm. Yes,
I
thank
send
you.
Yeah, well, so one of the things, like I remember, and I did this recently, I was talking to a couple who were opening up and they were really struggling around jealousy and around fears that anybody that they opened up with was going to want to step into the relationship, and they just couldn't manage those fears. Now, in the show that I was on, we had a closed environment that made that easier. So it made it possible for people to manage the fears when they first tried something out. And I was there to help with the emotions that came up, and that's the whole point of the show. But in the world, again, if you don't know how to risk assess, it can be difficult. You can be worried that somebody's really going to come and try and steal your partner or whatever. So I said, well, why don't you just hire a sex worker?
Yeah,
And these people were completely shocked with me. I mean, it's like,
of
oh, what
course
are you
you were.
suggesting? And I said, well, if you hire a woman and you tell her what you want and it's within her services, so she accepts the job, then she's there to do her job. She'll have
Mhm.
a great time with you. Don't, I mean, it's not like she's going to be, you know, not there, not present,
No.
not taking part, but she's there to do her job. And when her job is over, she goes away.
Yeah.
That's how it works. That's what the service is. And so that way you don't have to worry that she wants something
Yeah.
from this man. She's not looking for a personal relationship with your partner, or he's not. And I've sent people to male sex workers as well, or he's not. They're just not. They're there to do their job, and so you can try something out with somebody who's got experience,
Mhm.
who knows what they're doing, and who takes that emotional burden away from you to see if it's something you even want.
That's so genius because I feel like a lot of the times, and thank you for sending people our way. That's just amazing. I love to hear that. As I feel like, how often does a conversation come up in terms of like, I guess, playing on that jealousy conversation? Is that a common thing that comes up in conversation like a lot, pretty
All the
frequent?
time,
Oh
all the
gosh.
time. And I mean, the thing is, one of the sad things is that I don't belong to this organization, so I'm not concerned about it. But there are a couple of therapy organizations in the United Kingdom that if you refer to a sex worker, you can get struck off.
Really?
Mhm. Yeah,
Wow.
the bias is that bad.
That is awful.
The bias is that bad. And so, like, you can't even refer to a surrogate. And I refer to surrogates as well because,
Yeah.
because I'm not doing that part of the work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And there's work to be done. And there's nothing to me. Going to a professional does a lot of things. And I mean a professional, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not telling them to go find somebody on Craigslist or in the
Right.
want ads. Although, these days, because of the new laws, that might be the
Yeah.
only place you can be. So please, I'm not trying to insult people who have to advertise there. But I'm talking about people who are professional. This is their job. They get themselves tested. They make sure that they're sexually healthy. They have boundaries. They're clear about what they'll do and what they won't do. That's if you're going to be experimenting and you want to take some of the fears out of picking somebody at random in the world, that's a nice way to do it.
Totally. Totally. I mean, going back to like your clients and stuff too, are they mostly couples? Are the individuals? Or like who are they mostly
I have
comprised of?
everybody.
Everybody.
Everybody. I see individuals, I see couples, I see hetero couples, gay couples, mixed couples, trans couples. I see threes and fours. Yeah, I see everybody. And I also run groups. So, yeah, I have a really good time.
Yeah, I bet you do. I mean, like going back to the conversation in terms of like who can benefit from this. I know that like a lot of clients might be able to see sex therapists for whatever anxiety that they may have or nervousness or stigma or shame. Do you want to speak a little bit about that and like what that how you can help solve that? I know that everyone's different and their each case is different, but go into that
But
generally.
okay, so I work with people specifically on looking at where the shame comes from a bit. We're not going to go and try and find. Sometimes people come and they want to know where the kink comes from.
Yeah,
They want to trace it back to its origin. That's a waste of money most of the time, right? Because it's not easy to do and it takes a long time. And so the more time you're with me, the more expensive it is, right?
yeah,
So you don't really want to be doing that. But sometimes it's good to be able to identify where is the shame coming from? What is the shame around? And I do specific things to help people bust that shame and that runs the gamut from some of it from educating. Like sometimes people aren't aware that there are whole communities out there that share their kink.
yeah,
um, I'm teaching a bunch on a conference for a bunch of therapists in February about humiliation kinks because if you're not into humiliation, that you can get disgusted very quickly, and you show that on your face, and of course the client then sees it, and so much for the therapy.
yeah.
So stuff like that, and really help people to feel comfortable with whatever it is they desire, as long as what they're desiring they're doing with consent.
Right.
I won't help normalize anything that requires somebody who is non-consensual or a non-consensual creature on the other end. That's criminal
Mhm.
behavior. That's not sex
Totally.
behavior. But other than that, it's really just working around helping people to feel comfortable with who they are.
Mhm. Yeah.
And then a lot of the time it's skills practicing again. So
Right.
once you are comfortable but you're still a little bit anxious about talking to people, practicing talking about it until you are able to talk about it. I also notice that people don't learn how to risk assess for partners.
Mhm.
You
Oh,
will risk assess when you get on a plane. You risk assess when you spend your money. We risk assess all sorts of things that we do health wise, but often we don't actually risk assess when we meet people. So people kind of forget to pay attention to what their gut's telling them
mhm.
because the messages they've had from childhood override, so they don't pay attention. So teaching people how to really be in contact with their gut so that they make good partner choices, because that's a big thing. It's being careful who you're speaking to so that
Mhm.
you're comfortable being open and honest.
Yeah, I never even thought about that, but you're absolutely correct. That doesn't happen very often, or I don't hear about it
No,
even.
no, particularly with people who've been traumatized, I spend a lot of time um, on the after the kind of therapy to deal with the symptoms, the next bit of recovery and really getting your life back is to learn the things that you were talked out of. And one of those is really getting back in touch with your gut so you can make better choices. And the number of one of the most common ones, the number of women who will report that they felt uncomfortable about a person who then goes on to assault them, but they talk themselves out of it because they could hear their mom saying, "Oh, you're too picky. He
Mm.
has a good job and he's a nice man," or right, things like that, where people will talk themselves out of their gut feeling, or people who will not walk out of an abusive relationship. This goes for all genders, because the person hasn't done something bad enough yet.
Oh, no.
You know, I mean, I remember saying, "Well, why haven't you left?" Well, she didn't hit me, but you're miserable,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? But you've been taught you need a reason to,
Yeah.
instead of being able to actually assess, okay, how healthy is this for me? What kind of danger am I in? What are the risks I'm taking? And even when you talk about sexual health, it's a really important one.
Mhm.
So, do you use a condom when you have oral sex, right? Or
Right.
do you use a dental dam when you have oral sex? Those are the two questions. And people will often say, "Well, no, I don't like it. No, no, no." And I say, okay, so look, that's fine as long as you know the risk you're taking. The same as if you go bareback when you're having penetrative sex. You are taking a risk. And so I'm not telling you what risk to take. That's not my business. I'm not the morality police.
No.
That's not my function. You can do whatever you choose to do. What I want you to do is actually make a conscious choice, which requires you to think about what the risks are. You
Absolutely.
want to take a bunch of drugs and go to a sex party, you decide that that's a reasonable risk, you can do that. But I want you to be able to explain to me what the risks are and what the benefits are, and then go and make your choice consciously.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I feel like sometimes, no, maybe a lot of the time, we don't even think about that. And sometimes we are just too spontaneous or too in the moment, or things like that. Like, people don't, I mean, like people my age, when I was like 20 before, I never thought about using like a lot of protection when it came to like oral sex. And
But
I
the
never
thing is,
see it as a risk.
that you, if you risk assess, then you can be in the moment.
Hmm.
It's just like setting up your boundaries in advance and having the negotiation in advance. If you do that in advance, then you can be really present, which you really want to be, because you have the most fun when you're in the moment. But if
Absolutely.
you don't do that in advance, lots of times people aren't fully there because they're acting in ways that aren't helpful to them.
Hmm. Totally. I mean, I asked you about like clients of sex workers seeing you, but what about sex workers seeing you? Because I don't know. I feel like maybe we need some coaching sometimes. Maybe we have our own issues when it comes to intimacy when we can't separate the two, or maybe we're just not turned on anymore. Stuff like that. Like, tell us
I mean,
about
I
that.
do see sex workers. I do see
Mhm.
sex workers, and I because I'm sex worker friendly and knowledgeable, it's not unusual for somebody to seek me out. Sex workers come with all the same problems as everyone else,
Yeah.
with the added difficulty that they also have to deal with sex on a daily basis. Whereas somebody who's having issues around sex can kind of decide to avoid it for a while, take a break,
Yep.
right? Okay, well, I'm going to take a break until I sort this out. Well, that becomes an additional issue, because the question then is, if you do take a break from work, where are you financially and what do you do? So there are an extra set of issues. Also, a lot of times with partner issues.
Hmm.
And so I've done some couple work with a partner who's not the sex worker and the sex
Right.
worker, in trying to discuss what boundaries are and what things look like, to get over some of the main issues, because people forget that sex workers have lives, completely
Yeah.
separate lives,
Yeah.
and they have partners, and their partners, and many people have partners who know what they do.
Yes. Yeah. That's a
So
huge thing.
it's working with that, also with couples who work in the industry, and that's interesting, because sometimes that I mean, jealousy is definitely a theme that runs through.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
and dealing with that.
jealousy.
So yeah,
Jealousy can definitely be a common theme in any relationship,
yeah.
whether or
I
not
mean,
you're sex work or not.
well, I think I just did a podcast on jealousy and envy on my podcast recently, and what I was talking about with this amazing therapist who had written an article that was brilliant. What we were talking about was the differences, and I was saying that I don't really get jealous, and he was like, "Ever?" And I was like, "Well, no, not ever in my life, but now in the relationship that I'm in, the marriage that I'm in, I don't, because we've been together 13 and a half years, and so
Mhm.
I feel very secure in his feelings for me." And I also feel very secure in the relationship. I don't worry that somebody's going to come and grab him and take him away. So jealousy isn't a thing, but I still have envy sometimes. Like if I'm working and he's getting to have fun, I might be envious. I also can experience jealousy in new relationships sometimes. You know, I'm pretty confident, and so and that's because I do work on myself. Not, I mean, that people don't realize, the way you get to be in this position of confidence and comfort with yourself is actually by doing work on yourself. And I do.
Yeah.
And so jealousy is not a big thing for me, but envy definitely crops up.
Wow. I mean, how do you like when you have issues? Like, who do you go to? I know you said you work on yourself, but like, is there any times that you seek someone too?
Well,
When
yeah, when I say I work on myself, I don't mean I'm doing it alone. I mean,
no,
I do stuff alone, but I have a peer that we talk every week, and so we do a lot of stuff back and forth. I have a supervisor that I see, and I see this my supervisor monthly. If something came up that was more than that, and it was to do with a client, I could see him more often. I have gone back into therapy at times when I felt a need for that. I've done personal development. So there's all sorts of ways that I do stuff, but I always have outlets and places where I can get help because it's essential. You can't work with clients unless you're doing well.
absolutely. That's so important, and you set such a good example for that too. So thanks for sharing. Dr. Lori Beth, I'd love to go into some questions here that came in from the audience. And I know we were talking about free and like, we should be charging for stuff. A couple questions that came in from the audience. You're free to answer. We're free to skip. It's up to you. But let's go into it because I know we just have a few minutes left here. This person from Twitter writes in the book, The Body Keeps the Score, is great in discussing how trauma affects the body. How do the penis and vulva hold trauma?
No different than the rest of the body, right?
Just a body part.
It's a body part. So, what he talks about a lot is the way we hold it. It's neural, right? It's nerves, and we've got nerves. So we've got nerves in the vulva, we've got nerves in the penis. So the same way everywhere. There isn't any real difference.
Gotcha. Next person writes in, I have been in a relationship for 3.5 years with my partner, and before meeting him, I was experimenting with open relationships. How can I tell my monogamous partner that I am not fully monogamous?
Okay. So that's a delicate one if you've never mentioned it before. Um, one way of doing that is starting to talk about what your past looked like. And if you haven't shared that with them, it's a good thing to be looking at doing. Um, and seeing their response.
Right.
If it looks like they're going to find it really difficult, I would definitely suggest doing it with a coach,
Mm-hmm.
instead of doing it on your own. If it looks like it's going to become a very sticky conversation, there are couples where one person is monogamous and the other person is not. It
Mm.
can be done. I have like a subspecialty in that because I wrote an article on it once. So all these people have come to me over the years with that from that article. It can be done. It is hard work. It's harder work than when your orientation is both the same, but it can be done, but you do have to negotiate it very carefully. So if this is something that hasn't been negotiated, I would suggest feeling out what they think about open relationships, um, finding a way to talk about your past, and then if you think it's gonna be a really big bugbear, like you can't move it from the past to how you're feeling in the present, get some help to have that conversation be one where there's a professional there who can help translate and explain and keep you civil with each other.
Perfect. And we'll be plugging Dr. Lori Beth Bisbey's links in the show notes if you haven't clicked already, in case you're looking for her expert advice. Next question we have, what are some ways my partner and I can spice up a relationship besides the common messaging that you see in society, i.e. introducing a toy, going to the strip club, role playing, lingerie, and etc.?
So, you're saying you don't want to try the common way. So what I would suggest is go to erotica, and in order to figure out what might be a good way to spice your relationship up. I send my clients to erotica. I send them to written erotica. I
Right.
send them to audio porn and porn. You have your choice. There are also lots of movies. If you don't like straight porn, if that's not your thing and you want something with a storyline, I've got an ebook that's 100 movies that are not X-rated with all sorts of movies that are pretty hot and pretty heavy in all sorts of different ways, but there are no cum shots, right? So, you know, but I suggest that the two of you start exploring, and you can each go off and read your own stuff and find stuff and then bring it back. Like reading to each other can be really hot. And watching things together can be really hot. But that's where your exploration starts. And that's how you decide what you're going to do to spice things up instead of just kind of going, oh, let's try role playing this week. Go
Right.
and see what's out there and see if something grabs you. And if it grabs you, that's the direction you go in.
Gotcha. And last question, and we're just going to squeeze this one in. This one is coming in from a sex worker as well. So this person is writing in, I have a regular. He treats me really well. We've been together for about a couple of years now. He pays me wonderfully. However, where am I? Oh, shoot. Sorry. However, he tends to trauma dump all the time in terms of just dropping everything on me with his workday. And now it's coming to a point where I am done with it. What can I say to my regular? I don't want to lose him.
That's hard if you've not set a boundary before. I think if you can have a sensitive conversation, I think if I were in your position and you really don't want to lose him, I would give him 10 minutes off the clock and say, I just want to talk to you about something. And then say, I know that one of the things that you appreciate in our relationship is being able to tell me some of the things that have been causing you issues during the day. But I've noticed recently that there's been an awful lot and it's been a bit overwhelming for me. Is there a way that we can negotiate this differently? And I think the offering him the 10 minutes or the 15 minutes to have the conversation because you're raising an issue and you're letting him know that you really want to still keep working with him should make that an easier conversation, and you can negotiate what will work. It also shows him that you value him. Now, he may or may not be okay with that, and you may still lose him, but at least you can try to have that conversation in a way that he might be able to hear you, because that's probably not the only reason he's coming to you. But if it's
Right.
gotten worse recently, he might actually need some actual professional help, and you might be wanting to suggest that. So
Yeah.
I really feel you might get more for this part of things by actually talking to a coach or a counselor or a therapist.
Yeah. And that's another thing that sex workers, we're not therapists. So just throw that out there. But yeah, that's really, really sound advice for sure. But Dr. Lori Beth Bisbey, where can we find you before we let you go?
So the easiest way is drloribethbisbey.com. That's my website. It's got links to most of my stuff. I'm on Instagram I'm at Dr. Bisbey, Twitter at Dr. Bisbey, TikTok I'm at Lori Beth UK. On my website, on the contact page, there is a way to book a time with me. There's a way to send me an email. There will be phone numbers up there soon if you wanted to send a text and didn't feel like emailing. There's also connect to my PR person if you're somebody who wants to hire me, to interview me. And if you're somebody who wants to hire me to do something in media, then there's a link to the agent, which is always nice. So all of that you can do as well. But if you're looking for my help, all the links are on my website. And also there's stuff on Instagram as well. On Instagram, I've got a book now button that gives you some choices. My link tree is also on Instagram, which gives links to like the kind of most popular services. So whatever works best for you and is most comfortable for you.
Awesome. And all those links are in the show notes below. So be sure to click that before hopping off and before we finish the episode. But for everyone else that's listening, it's new episodes every single Sunday. It's Stripped by Sia on all podcast platforms. Feel free to rate 5 stars on Spotify or write a nice review on Apple. It's really up to you. Maybe you want to subscribe to Patreon. It's patreon.com/strippedbysia and Stripped by Sia on Twitter and Instagram. And that is it, folks, for this week's episode. Thank you so much, Dr. Bisbey, for coming on the show today. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you. You're listening to Stripped by Sia, hosted, produced, and edited by Steph Sia. Music by Ted D. Graphic design by Maria Bellanderama, and photography by Ian Dabrin.